Good morning, it's Monday the 23rd of May and welcome to Atlantic Capital Markets roundup of the coming week's economic highlights to keep an eye out for. As always, we'll start with a quick rundown of the key economic numbers being issued this week around the world's markets. We'll then dive into some of the more significant highlights afterwards and give our own thoughts and analysis. So without further ado, let's get on with it. So the economic numbers being issued this week start today with an update on retail sales in New Zealand and the IFO business sentiment in Germany. Tuesday brings us a snapshot of how the Eurozone's faring in these difficult times with the release of the flash PMIs, and that's something we'll discuss in more detail afterwards. We'll also get the same update on the UK and US figures. It's interest rate decision day on Wednesday in New Zealand, and we'll give our thoughts on that after this. We'll also get an update on GDP growth in Germany and the US durable goods figures. And also the release of the minutes from the Fed's last meeting, which will make interesting reading after May's 50 basis point hike and any clue to further potential rises. Again, that's something we'll look at in more detail afterwards. Thursday brings us an update on GDP Q1s in the US and the jobless claims. And finally on Friday, we'll get an update on the Fed's favourite inflation measure, the PCE index in the US, which we'll discuss after this, and an update on the Michigan consumer confidence. And the companies that we'll hear updates from this week are as follows. BBQ and Screwfix owner Kingfisher released their Q1 results on Monday, and we'll give our thoughts on this straight afterwards. Also on Monday, we'll hear from video conferencing provider Zoom. Tuesday brings us HomeServe and Shaftesbury. On Wednesday, the company that's traditionally underclothed most of this nation, Marks & Spencer, released their full year results. Again, strong headwinds. We'll give our take on their struggles afterwards. We'll also give our thoughts on US chipmaker NVIDIA, who released their Q1s on Wednesday. Wednesday also brings us Pets at Home, SSE, HP and Snowflake. Thursday brings us Johnson Matthey, Ted Baker and Costco. And finally, Friday, we'll hear from Dell. Well, volatility in the markets was high last week, with indices and the US dollar tumbling on fears of a US recession as stagflation gripped the market. Global recession fears and high inflation themes are expected to continue this week. The Davos World Economic Forum is taking place, and whilst this isn't usually market moving, investors do often keep it on the radar. So let's take a look at some of this week's key stories in detail. On Monday, Kingfisher released their Q1 results. Now, the last year was a strong year for Kingfisher, boosted by lockdown, which helped the retailer post record profits and revenues. Pre-tax profits were up 33% at just over £1 billion, and sales rose 6.8% to £13.18 billion. However, UK retailers have had a tough year so far, and B&Q and Screwfix owner Kingfisher is no different. With the share price down by more than 25% year to date, shares tumbled to the lowest level since July 2020 earlier this month, as concerns over the impact of rising costs and weaker sales on revenues and profit. Expectations are for revenue to drop 8.1% yearly when sales benefited from the lockdown boost. On Tuesday, the Eurozone posts its latest PMIs. Well, despite the fallout from the ongoing Ukraine conflict, Eurozone business activity, as measured by the Composite Purchasing Managers Index, the PMI, continued to show resilience in April at 58.9, significantly above the reference level 50, which separates expansion from contraction. Now, this does, of course, raise some questions over the credibility of these figures in terms of assessing the performance of an economy, given that we know the picture is deteriorating rapidly. Expectations are for the composite PMI in May to remain strong at 58.7, which could help the euro continue its recovery from 2022 lows. Wednesday is interest rate decision day in New Zealand. Well, New Zealand's Reserve Bank started hiking interest rates slowly with a 25 basis point rate rise in March, before upping the pace to 50 points in April. Expectations are for the central bank to follow with another 50 basis point hike in May, which is around 90% priced in, while a 25 basis point hike is fully priced in. The central bank has said that it is committed to reducing consumer prices so that inflation does not become embedded in longer-term inflation expectations. The Reserve Bank could signal several more outsized hikes in the upcoming meetings as it looks to front-load hikes. The New Zealand dollar was one of the top-performing currencies against the US dollar last week, rising 1.8%. Wednesday also brings full-year results from Marks & Spencer. Now, shares in M&S rose to a 21-month high at 263 pence at the start of the year. However, since then, the price has halved as investors fret over the headwinds in the retail sector. That said, it's not likely to be all doom and gloom, with the Ocado partnership a crucial part of the turnaround strategy for the high street retail giant. For the 13 weeks to 1st of January, food sales rose 10% year-on-year, while clothing and home sales rose 3.2% on a two-year basis. However, since then, the Russian war has sent costs surging, with food and clothing prices likely to rise steeply in the coming months, as freight, containers and labour costs also increase. In March, CEO Steve Rowe said that he would be stepping down to be replaced by COO Stuart Machin. Well, the minutes of the last meeting of the Fed are also due to be released on Wednesday, and the Federal Reserve raised interest rates by 50 basis points in the May meeting, taking the benchmark lending rate to 1%. But Fed Chair Jerome Powell dismissed talks of a 75 basis point rate hike, saying that it wasn't something that the committee was considering. In the same meeting, the Fed also announced plans to reduce its balance sheet by $47.5 billion in June, moving to $95 billion a month from September. The minutes of the May Fed meeting will be scrutinised for clues over how quickly the US Central is planning to raise those interest rates in the upcoming meetings. Most policymakers support 50 basis point rate hikes at the next few meetings. However, any sign of a 75 basis point rate increase could spook the market. And finally, on Wednesday, NVIDIA are due to release their Q1 results. Well, NVIDIA's share price has fallen by almost half since reaching an all-time high of $320 last November. The chipmaker has seen elevated revenue growth across the past 4 quarters, and hopes are high that Q1 will make it a fifth. However, the bar is set high and there are some headwinds forming. Weakness in the gaming chip business could hold earnings back for the chipmaker due to the reopening of the economy post-COVID. However, this is still NVIDIA's biggest earner, with revenues of $3.42 billion in Q4, up 37% year-on-year. The data center segment is expected to remain strong. Revenue was up 71% in Q4 at $3.26 billion. Wall Street expects earnings per share of $1.20 on revenues of $8.12 billion. And finally, on Friday, we'll hear the release of the latest US core PCE deflator figures. Well, this index is the Fed's preferred measure of inflation, which increased 5.2% year-on-year in March, but is expected to have slipped to 4.9% in April as the measures to reduce inflation start to have an impact. Now, the Fed has raised rates by 75 basis points across 2 meetings so far, with another 50 basis point hike expected in June. Inflation, as measured by CPI, fell to 8.3% year-on-year in April. That's down from 8.5%. A fall in the core PCE could help fuel bets that peak inflation has passed. The US dollar index fell 1.5% last week after 7 straight weeks of gains. So those were the big stories of the week. Let's wrap up with a quick look at the dividend announcements due this week. In the FTSE 100, we'll hear from Intertek Group, Whitbread, Sage Group, Imperial and DCC. And in the FTSE 250, we'll hear from Balfour Beatty, IP Group, Victex, Granger, Diploma, Britvic, Contour Global, BlackRock, World Mining Trust and Vivo Energy. So there you have it, yet another busy week in the world's markets, and as ever, we're there to provide our commentary on the important stuff. As always, thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to click on that subscribe button to make sure that you don't miss out on our regular financial updates with our expert market analysis and our opinions. Also, if you haven't tried it already, why not download our app to your phone or tablet if you do want to keep updated on the latest financial news, as well as our award-winning trading signals. So until next time, from all of us here at Atlantic Capital Markets, have yourself a great week.